Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast brought to you by Agriland, keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Agriland journalist Aisling O'Brien. We have a busy podcast ahead of us, so we'll jump straight in and talk about TB. As we've covered in some detail on the Farming Week and on Agriland more generally, the key metrics for TB are all moving in the wrong direction. This has been the trend in recent years and it shows no signs of abating. Now, the Department of Agriculture is proposing some fairly drastic measures to combat this. Aisling, you were working on this story for us this week, so can you tell us more?
Yeah, so we revealed on Wednesday night how we understand the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine has actually outlined over 20 proposed measures to curb the spread of bovine TB across the country. And those proposals were presented to members of the TB Forum, which includes farm organisations and industry stakeholders, amongst others. And that meeting took place on Wednesday, but I have to stress, nothing has yet been agreed when we're talking about these proposals, and they very much are proposals at this stage. And look, there are concerns out there, and we understand that the department itself is very concerned, Charles, that the number of TB reactors could hit over 60,000, given the current trajectory. And the latest figures that we have are between February 11th of last year and February 9th of this year. The number of reactors stood at 41,318, and we see the increase in the herd incidence rate as well. So as you said, the current trajectory, it's all going in the wrong direction when it comes to TB. So during the meeting of the TB Forum this week, we understand that the department proposed that breakdowns in high-risk herds would require 2 clear tests at least 6 months apart, along with a mandatory risk mitigation plan, which we understand would include a buying-in plan as well as part of that, and to reduce residual infection in large breakdowns of breeding herds. It's believed that the department is proposing mandatory blood testing or gift testing of the infected animals where a certain threshold is reached. It's also proposed that the sale of high-risk cows from high-risk herds would be prevented for a period of 3 years after de-restriction. And when it comes to relapse herds, the proposals are believed to include no compensation for the retention or purchase of high-risk animals. And also when it comes to relapse herds, Charles, we understand that there may also be a ban from selling breeding stock on the open market until all of the infected animals are culled. That's in the case of relapse herds. We're also hearing that a mandatory disclosure of a TB herd risk category at the point of sale is understood to be being put forward as well. And in the case of non-high-risk animals, these proposals include allowing the sale of TB test negative cull cows from a TB restricted herd at special cull cow sales in March. This is a very interesting development, and it'll be interesting to see how the sector and farmers react to this. And it's believed that such sales would be limited to purchasing by controlled finishing units or CFUs only. Now, the proposals also include that a pre-movement test be required for all cattle returning from contract rearing situations. And it's also understood that the measures include that animals will only be allowed to move twice between herds after a skin test. Now, I know when it comes to TB, Charles, the issue of wildlife is always to the fore. And what we understood from the meeting yesterday is that a review of the effectiveness of the current department wildlife policy when it comes to TB is also being considered as well. Now, the proposals also include that TB resistance be incorporated into the compensation scheme and that the use of high TB resistant bulls be encouraged. We've seen the department doing that on their social media quite a lot at the moment when farmers are making breeding choices to include that metric in their choices when selecting bulls as well. Now, I suppose this is all very much in its infancy in some ways, Charles. The TB Forum has been discussing various measures over recent months, and farm organisations were asked to put forward their own proposals as well as part of this entire process. And we have some reaction to the proposals that were outlined by the department yesterday from Deputy President of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the ICMSA, Eamon Carroll. And he said he believes that these proposed measures involve all of the TB burden being placed back onto farmers. And he said the ICMSA had no intention of asking farmers to accept very significant portions of the proposed measures presented at yesterday's meeting. And he said that thousands of farmers were already suffering severe financial distress due to TB. And while some factors were within farmers' control, many others were not. And he said that the new approach seems to involve imposing a load of new rules on the farmers. And let's be specific, he said, dairy farmers, while allowing everyone else, including the department itself, to carry on doing just what they've been doing. And he said that this is going to give us the same results, or the lack of them, and has seen us in the position that we are at the moment. And he said the bottom line of today's new measures involves putting more pressure on the group already under the most pressure, which is the farmers, while leaving everyone else alone. And he has called on the department to produce the scientific data behind each of the individual measures presented at yesterday's meeting. And he wanted those to be tabled at the next TB Forum meeting, which will happen in the coming weeks as well. Now, we did reach out to Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Martin Hayden, and a spokesperson for the minister told us that this is only the start of engagement with stakeholders. A lot of discussion and engagement lies ahead until a consensus is reached for this very serious challenge for the sector. So some very interesting proposals out there. It'll be interesting to see when farmers have a chance to read through them, what they feel, and you can read all of that in detail on our website and app.
And Aisling, that wasn't the only TB-related news we had this week.
Yeah, so the Department of Agriculture, Charles, is seeking independent valuers as part of the National TB Eradication Programme. And they've invited suitably qualified individuals who want to be considered for the roles under the On-Farm Market Valuation Scheme. And that scheme is the principal compensation measure available to farmers whose herds are affected by a TB breakdown. And the department confirmed that a panel of valuers will be established in November, and it will run for a period of 3 years. Now, what we're being told is the candidates have to have at least 3 years relevant experience and hold a current registration with the Institute of Professional Auctioneers and Valuers, IPAV. And the department added that all applicants must not be a registered cattle dealer nor a factory agent. And then we were told that applicants who meet the initial qualifying criteria will be required to undergo an assessment of their expertise in evaluating bovine livestock and overall relevant knowledge by way of an assessment session. And applicants will actually be ranked on the outcome of those sessions, and then they will be placed onto the valuers panel if they are successful. And what we're being told is it's currently envisaged that the department will be requiring a minimum of 5 valuers per county. And if it's something that interests you, the closing date for applications, 5 p.m. on Friday, the 11th of April.
We're going to move on now and talk about the ongoing story of missing Kerry farmer Michael Gain. The 56-year-old sheep farmer was last seen this day last week on Thursday, March 20th. The Gardaí have been providing the public with updates today. Aisling, what's the latest information now as we're recording the podcast?
Yeah, so this morning, Charles, I travelled down to Kenmare in South Kerry, which is the town closest to Michael Gain's farm. It's a very extensive farm that he owns, 1,000 acres near Moll's Gap on the iconic McGillicuddy Reeks, a very picturesque part of the country. And as you said, Gardaí gave an update to the media this morning on their missing persons investigation, and they also carried out a number of checkpoints in the Kenmare area to speak with local people, to perhaps maybe jog their memory of the events of the past week, and to see if they could get any further information as part of their ongoing search for Michael Gain. Now, Michael Gain, who was also known as Mike Gain, was reported missing from his home near Kenmare last Friday, which would have been March 21st. And as you said, he was last seen in Kenmare town on this day last week, which would have been Thursday, March 20th. Now, he bought phone credit in Centra in Kenmare shortly before 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. And he then left in his bronze-coloured Toyota RAV4 Jeep, which had a registration of 152KY366. And that vehicle was found parked in Michael Gain's farmyard just off the N71 road at Carrick East. Now, Superintendent David Callahan, who is leading the missing person investigation, made an appeal to the public this morning in Kenmare. And here is some of what he had to say.
It is now 1 week since the last sighting of Michael Gain. Michael's family have not heard from him, and his family and An Garda Síochána are extremely concerned for his well-being. Michael is described as being approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, of stocky build, brown grey hair and a bushy beard.
So that was Superintendent David Callaghan there, who is leading the investigation, the missing person investigation here. And a CCTV image of Michael Gain has been released by Gardaí as well. That image shows Michael Gain on the morning when he was last seen in the Centra shop in Kenmare. And I suppose you'll see from the image, which you can see on our website and app, he was wearing an orange woolly hat, a black fleece, blue jeans and black boots when he was last seen. Now, searches have been carried out at Michael's farm and in the immediate area, and Gardaí say they're continuing to work with and they're fully supported by other state and voluntary agencies in their ongoing efforts to locate Michael. And they also thanked the members of the public who helped in carrying out searches on land last weekend. Indeed, hundreds of local people turned up, Charles, to take part in those searches. It was coordinated from the local mart, from Kenmare Mart, and local people also dropped off food for the search teams as well. So a huge effort. And Kerry County Councillor Dan McCarthy, who's also the manager of Kenmare Mart, told me that the mood in the local community is very sombre at the moment. It's, people are very worried for the welfare of Michael. And he said that their thoughts were with his wife, his sisters and his extended family. And Dan McCarthy actually lives close to Mike Gain and would be a good friend of his. And he said that the outpouring of support in the community over the past few days had been unbelievable, and it showed the esteem that Michael is held in the community and also his family too. And along with being very well known in the farming community, Michael Gain would have been a great fan of rallying and would have been well known in those circles as well. So what we understand is that Gardaí are continuing their search at Michael Gain's lands over the last 2 days. On Monday, they thanked members of the public, but said that they wouldn't be requiring their help, for the immediate future anyway, until further notice. And what we understand is that slurry tanks at the farmyard were drained in recent days as part of this search. And indeed today, Charles, when I was making my way back from Kenmare, I passed the farm of Michael Gain, and there was a sizable Garda presence with diggers working and bales being moved in the yard. It was a real hive of activity. And when we got closer up then to Moll's Gap, you could see the Garda water unit van was present up there. Members of that unit joined the search yesterday, and we understand they're carrying out searches in lakes and rivers and water bodies in the surrounding area as well. And look, Superintendent Callaghan said that Gardaí are continuing to want to speak to any person who travelled on the N71 road on Thursday, March 20th. And he also appealed to anyone with any camera footage, that would include dash cam or CCTV footage or any other images from Thursday, March 20th and Friday, March 21st in the Kenmare Town and Moll's Gap area, to provide those images to the Garda investigating team. And he said that anybody who's any information can contact Killarney Garda Station, the Garda Confidential Line, or indeed any Garda station. So I suppose, look, at the time when we're recording this podcast right now, Charles, unfortunately, Michael Gain still remains missing, and that Garda investigation is continuing.
Thanks for that update, Aisling. And Agriland will, of course, bring you all the updates on this case as they occur. So stay tuned to our app and website. We're going to move on now to agri-business matters. Dairygold has said that some 70 jobs are expected to go at the processor over a 3-year period as part of a cost-cutting drive announced this week. What are the details on this announcement, Aisling?
Yes, Charles. So the processor announced this week that it's seeking to make €14 million in cost savings across its business over a 3-year period from 2025 to 2027. Now, the board of Dairygold recently approved the implementation of a business optimization program, and in conjunction with 2025 budget initiatives, we're being told that that is how they're going to reach this target of €14 million in savings. Now, the co-op said that the programme followed a comprehensive review which began back in November of last year, and that review sought to identify the measures to structure the business for what it termed optimum efficiency, cost competitiveness, margin enhancement and future growth. Now, Dairygold said that the measures include manufacturing and operational efficiencies, organisational restructuring and the rationalisation of third-party expenditure. And that organisational restructuring, as you said, Charles, in your introduction, is expected to include the loss of around 70 positions over the 3-year period. And the co-op said that this additional headcount reduction, which is what they termed this process, will be spread across the Dairy Ireland business, agribusiness and business support and management functions. And these will be achieved through a combination of natural attrition, redeployments and some voluntary redundancy, we were told. And Dairygold is now going to initiate a process of communication and consultation with employees and their representatives to enable effective delivery of the programme, the co-op told us this week. Now, Dairygold Chief Executive Michael Hart said improving competitiveness and optimising its core business performance is fundamental to achieving its 2030 growth strategy. And he said that a period of significant labour, energy and materials price inflation together with interest rate changes have increased the cost base of their business. And he also said that milk forecasting had confirmed that milk production for Dairygold is stabilising at 1.4 billion litres. And he said, therefore, it's timely that they take stock, they review their structures and right-size their business and optimise their performance while maintaining the flexibility to manage fluctuations in milk production when necessary. So I suppose the next step in that journey now, as Dairygold said, will be to engage with employees and to see how this cost savings plan can be rolled out across the co-op, Charles.
Well, just while we're on dairy, we'll just remind you that farmers seeking a nitrates derogation for 2025 can now apply through the Ag-Food system. The closing date for applications is May 15th. That news comes as Minister Martin Hayden said Ireland will shortly make its first presentation to the European Commission to outline the country's case to retain the nitrates derogation. And speaking of closing dates, farmers are being reminded that they must act before next week's residential zoned land tax deadline and apply for their lands to be rezoned regardless of previous applications. Farmers must apply to their local county council by Monday, March 31st to avail of a 1-year exemption and have their lands rezoned. But moving on now, and there have been a number of important developments across farm schemes in the last week, particularly for livestock farmers involved in dairy calved beef. Aisling, can you tell us more about this?
Yes, Charles, a very busy week on the schemes front. Last Friday, we got confirmation that payments for scheme year 1 of the CAP Strategic Plan Dairy Beef Welfare Scheme have begun. In total, over €4.7 million has begun issuing to some 7,600 participating farmers. Now, that scheme provides support to dairy farmers to improve the animal health and welfare of the national dairy herd by using better genetic merit beef sires. It involves a payment of €20 per eligible calf, up to a maximum of 50 calves per applicant herd. And this is the first year of the scheme as part of Ireland's CAP strategic plan, with payments issuing in respect of eligible calves born between January 1st and December 31st of last year. Now, the scheme comes with a total budget of €25 million for 4 years. And we're being told that the scheme will reopen for applications in April. But farmers who did apply in 2024 don't have to reapply, as their participation in the scheme will automatically continue. But if you want to get in this year, you do have to put in your application next month. Then we also got news this week that €4 million has been earmarked towards the new National Dairy Beef Weighing Scheme. This scheme is going to target farmers rearing dairy beef progeny from the dairy herd, whether they are dairy farmers rearing their own calves or non-dairy farmers rearing dairy beef calves. And the Dairy Beef Weighing Scheme, it's a successor to similar schemes which operated from 2021 through to 2023 and were aimed at providing a diversification option for beef farmers. Now, participants in this scheme will be required to weigh eligible calves and submit that weight data to the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, the ICBF, and to qualify for payment, live weight data must be submitted for a minimum of 5 calves in a herd and for a maximum of 50, and all calves must be at least 12 12 weeks of age at the time that they are weighed. Now, weight data should be submitted within 7 days of weighing and before November 1st of this year. And farmers should note that they will only be paid on the number of calves in respect of which they have submitted that live weight data. And I suppose there has been reaction from the farm organisations to this scheme, Charles. I suppose it could be summed up in it being welcomed, but the farm organisations saying a lot more needs to be done for this sector and particularly for farmers involved in this sort of production system.
And Aisling, there was news for sheep farmers as well on the schemes front in the last week.
Yes, Charles, the department confirmed the opening of year 3 of the sheep improvement scheme to new entrants. This is a 5-year scheme with a total budget of €100 million, and it provides financial support to farmers for taking extra steps to improve the welfare of their flock. Farmers will get €12 per breeding ewe per year for completing flock welfare measures, and the closing date for applications is April 29th. And just before we leave the schemes updates for this week, Charles, briefly on TAMS, of course, the Targeted Agricultural Modernisation Scheme. The department this week issued its first update on applications made under Tranche 5 of TAMS 3. We learned that almost 800 of the 5,800 applications have been approved. You can find full details on our website and app. And just to mention as well, the closing date very fast approaching for that shorter tranche of TAMS, which opened in response to the damage caused by Storm Éowyn. That actually closes tomorrow, Friday, March 28th. And of course, there's specific items that you can apply for under that tranche of TAMS, including backup PTO generators, sheep, cattle, equine fencing, wood and biomass chippers and mulchers. And just to note that tranche 7 of TAMS 3, which will cater for applications across all of the TAMS measures, is due to open on Saturday, March 29th, and it will close then on June 6th. So some dates for your diary if you're interested in TAMS.
Before we move on, we just want to briefly bring you up to speed with the foot and mouth disease situation in Europe at the minute. In the last 7 days, we've seen 4 cases of the disease occur in Slovakia, with a second case also confirmed in its neighbour Hungary, which already confirmed a case earlier in March. Authorities in both countries have said that culling of infected herds will be carried out, with several other restrictions being put in place as well. Slovakia in particular has drafted in its police and fire services to aid in combating the outbreak, and the country has sought financial support for the impacted farmers from the EU. But moving on now, and we heard in the last week that the dizzying increases in beef prices are leaving some restaurants in a position where they have to take beef off their menus. That was said at the Good Food Ireland conference, where IFA President Francie Gorman was also in attendance. Fair to say beef prices generated some interesting discussion there, Aisling.
Yes, Charles. So we've been hearing from Breffney, our technical beef specialist in Agriland, over recent weeks on the podcast about the soaring beef prices, which of course have been warmly welcomed by farmers, and many would say they're long overdue. But it does seem that those high prices could be causing an issue at the other end of the food chain, of course, when it comes to restaurateurs, because during a panel discussion at the Good Food Ireland conference, we were told that some restaurants have decided to remove beef, in particular fillet steak, which of course would be probably seen as quite premium of an option to choose when you're going out for dinner. And they've decided to take those options off of their menus due to the cost of purchasing the food product. Now, Gary O'Hanlon is the executive chef at the K Club in Kildare, and he admitted for the first time he's now had to have the conversation about removing beef from the menu, and said at the end of the day, the customer is king and people won't pay it. Now, as you said, the IFA President Francie Gorman was also among the panellists, and he said that the prices paid to farmers in recent months are good, but he added that it's not before time, and that the beef price is high at the moment because cattle numbers are low, but that farmers needed that price increase. Take a listen.
We needed that price increase, and it's those price increases that come at times like this that sustain you through the difficult times and when cost of production go up.
Now, Francie Gorman said that the initiative Project Connect should also help to educate and inform consumers about how their food is produced. That is a collaboration between stakeholders like Bord Bia, Teagasc, the ICBF and farm organisations. And look, Francie Gorman did acknowledge that the price of steak is high at the moment, and in some cases it's hitting maybe as high as €50. But he explained that this is a cyclical trend and that there is more than just the cost of beef included in the end steak price as well. And he said that consumers are not aware that often the beef producer only gets about 10 to 20% of that final price. And factors such as energy costs, labour, regulation, and they all contribute to the final price of the steak that hits the plate in the restaurant as well. And look, I know many commentators out there, Charles, are saying outside of beef that, is this the end of the era of cheap food? We are seeing other different products, food products increasing as well. And I'm sure all of us, when we go to the supermarkets, have noticed that our bills are increasing as well. So it seems that food prices across the board seem to be on the rise, but particularly beef. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of restaurants and considering the likes of fillet steak being kept on menus at the moment.
Finally this week, we'll come to an issue that's been covered to great extent in national media, but also very much affects the agriculture sector. And that's the possibility of mutual tariffs on many products, including food, between the EU and the US. Aisling, never a dull day with this current US administration. Could you take us up to speed on what's been happening this week?
Well, I'll try in this very moment of this hour because it could change. Because as President Trump is likely to change his mind, this is what we know at the moment, Charles, at the time of recording. Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden was in Brussels this week, and he was taking part in the monthly meeting of agriculture ministers, that Agri-Fish Council. And he said that Ireland is really disappointed with the actions of the US administration with the threatened introduction of tariffs. And he said that the Irish government believes that a close working relationship between the EU and the US is in everyone's interests. And he also said this tit for tat of, us threatening trade tariffs and the US threatening trade tariffs isn't going to do anybody any good. And the Irish Farmers Association this week said that plans by President Trump to place tariffs on EU agri-food exports to the US would pose a significant threat to Irish food and drink exporters. The organisation said that roughly 1.9 billion euro of agri-food exports would be threatened by these tariffs if they come into effect. And the warning comes amid speculation that the president of the US is going to unveil a raft of new tariffs next week on April 2nd, which potentially would include the EU. And I suppose the EU are threatening their own raft of tariffs as well coming in from April 1st. And there are concerns, of course, about the impact of these tariffs, particularly on exports of the likes of butter and whiskey. And within the 1.9 billion euro figure of agri-food exports from Ireland to the US, dairy actually accounts for some 830 million euro, and drinks, predominantly whiskey, make up around 900 million euro. So, that's 91% of our exports to the US. So this is very, very serious, Charles. And IFA chief economist Ty Buckley drew particular attention to the importance of the Dairygold butter brand to the Irish agriculture sector. Of course, Dairygold is now the second best-selling butter brand in the US, Charles, and it's a very important part of that export figure as well. Now, the Board Bia Dairy Markets seminar took place today in Kildare, and it urged that a 25% tariff may create butter prices that are unreachable for consumers and may result in volume reductions for Ireland. And Minister of State of the Department of Agriculture, Noel Grealish, he's responsibility for new market development. He also spoke at that seminar, and he said that the US remains a particularly important trading partner with Irish dairy exports. And he said the Irish government would continue to safeguard that relationship. And as we previously reported on Agriland, Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden is set to lead a trade mission to the US in the coming weeks. And that trade mission, of course, will focus on highlighting the investment made by Irish food companies based in America. And the minister is expected to emphasise that around 200,000 Americans are employed across 770 Irish companies in the US during his meetings as part of that trade mission. So the diplomacy goes on, Charles, but as I said, it changes minute to minute, not a mind day to day at the moment.
Well, that's just about where we'll leave it for today. Just before we go, two farms, one in County Wicklow and one in County Cavan, defied the odds recently with triplet calves on one and sextuplet lambs on the other. You can read all about that and check out the pictures from both farms on Agriland.ie and the Agriland app. But that's it for today. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling and myself, have a good weekend.